I'm the man on a mission you see in the title. And I'm about to talk about the subject of the day, which is got to do with the case before the Supreme Court on whether or not Donald Trump should be disqualified. And I'm going to be talking about that in the context of the mission that I'm on. I've had a couple of levels of mission for the last 20 years, or you might say 30 actually, but at least really I could see that there was a force of fascism rising on the right 20 years ago. And the part of my mission has been how can American democracy be preserved and to some extent restored because of the damage that's been done. But my lifelong mission is a bigger picture about can we make the changes that we need to make in our civilization in time for human civilization to survive on this planet for the long haul, instead of having the story of our glorious species culminate in some self-inflicted catastrophe. And I want to say that those two missions are really part of the same thing. What we're in America right now, not humankind will get its act together or destroy itself. They're both they both involve the same. That's my dryer. Forgot about that. Both involve the same basic forces that are contending, and so it's a unified vision. And so when I talk about the, I want that to claim that I make, that it could actually be helpful to see things the way I'm trying to present them in my life's work. I'd like, as you listen to whatever else you have here that I have to say about, besides the disqualification, insurrection issue, a variety of other things like why we evolved to have a sense of humor, which I find a fascinating question, and also the question of the wise use of mind-altering substances. Also, in question about what the American administration can do to deal with the Netanyahu problem that's at the core of why things are going the way they're going in the Middle East. We have Hamas that's willing to commit atrocities, and it would be nice if we had an Israeli government that was better aligned with the good than Netanyahu is or has been, and particularly the government that he formed a little over a year ago. So as you hear me talk about all those different things, I'd like you just to have it simmering in the back of your mind, because I really don't expect people to take me seriously when I say, when I introduced this Better Human Story on Daily Kos some months back, I went full chutzpah to say what I actually believe to be true, an integrative vision. I was previewing an integrative vision that might help human civilization to survive. So either that's an expression of some old guy's grandiosity, or it's a legitimate claim that deserves to be taken seriously enough to help make that happen. And so I'd like you to keep that basic question in mind about plausibility of the claims. Well, anyway, turning now to the question of Trump's disqualification. First of all, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I have taught constitutional law to bright teenagers, juniors in a selective school, and I've been very interested in the Constitution since I was 19, at Harvard, I took a course in American constitutional law from a guy named Robert McCloskey, and he really turned me on to the Constitution, and I've been paying attention ever since. But anyway, so let me just say, for whatever it's worth, I'm pretty persuaded. I'm quite persuaded that an honest Supreme Court would be compelled by the Constitution to say that Donald Trump is disqualified. I've heard some of the arguments, that the other side brings, like is the president an officer? I mean, it's just ridiculous. You think you're going to want to keep insurrectionists who violated their oath out of every other office except for the most powerful one in the country? The guy is commander in chief of the U.S. Armed Forces. I mean, that makes no sense. If we just had one person that you wouldn't want to have be an oath breaker, it's the guy that has to take an oath to say that the laws will be faithfully enforced. So, I mean, all the arguments against it are bogus. But I'm also relying on people that I trust, people who do know more than I do about the Constitution, because I'm a reasonably highly educated. But months ago in the Atlantic, there was an article written jointly by two giants of contemporary constitutional law. One of them a very conservative guy, one of them quite liberal. The liberal guy is Lawrence Tribe, who has been teaching constitutional law at Harvard Law School for over half a century. And the other one is a retired judge who is sort of the darling of the Republican conservative world. At least he was before that world went full fascist. What's his name? Oh, gotta excuse me. Sometimes names don't come as quickly. It starts with an H, but anyway, I can picture his face. And the two of them wrote together a really persuasive piece that Trump's really exemplifies what the framers of the 14th Amendment had in mind. To use that to get them, keep them from getting anywhere near power again, and the finding that he was sufficiently involved in an insurrection, aid and comfort, or whatever, however you want to do it, that he is an insurrectionist. It seems pretty clear. And not only is there that joint essay by two giants of our times, but there have been a handful of friends of the court briefs that have been put in that apparently, and I've looked into them, they've gone deeply into the text, deeply into the history of the framing, deeply into the meanings of all these things, and a bunch of historians and some and even Ben Ginsburg, the guy who got the 5-4 Bush v. Gore decision, one of the guys. They apparently are quite compelling. So, all that's to say, the Constitution says that Trump should be disqualified. Whether they will or not is where I have something original to say, because I don't on any of these things. But there's also, I got a little bit of history about writing about this, and it ended up with my saying I was wrong, because my first set of thoughts have something to them, but I read something by Timothy Snyder that persuaded me that wasn't the right way to think about it. So let me give you a little bit of that history. My first thought was, yeah, the Constitution says he should be disqualified. But if just a handful of justices take Trump out of the the quest for power. When there are tens of millions of Americans who, for crazy reasons, want to give him that power, they're not going to respect that. And since we know that a certain subset of those tens of millions are inclined toward political violence, maybe it would be better to let the voters decide. Let the voters decide. Because in the American ethos, there's an authority to an American majority that might help suppress the insurrectionist possible response that a mere handful of justices might spark in the country. So we're less likely to confront a substantial problem of political violence if we let an American majority reject Trump. And I've expressed elsewhere, and you can find it in my videos and you can find it in my writings, that I feel a certain confidence that the American majority is going to reject Trump. Not so much confidence that I don't have a fearful feeling in the pit of my stomach that I might be wrong about that, but I do believe. So I thought, okay, well, the judges, the Constitution tells us to get rid of him in the court, but if we want to protect American democracy, and that's the goal, so in a pragmatic way, maybe it's better for the court to find some, as they're calling them these days, off-ramps. Find an off-ramp and get out of the way and leave it to November for, the American electorate, the will of the people to express itself that way you don't want Trump on the stage. And a decisive victory would be possible and really good, because when you say, well, let the voters decide, we have a little bit of history here, and it should be not ignored that we did let the voters decide. That's what happened with the impeachment that Adam Schiff, people on the Trump side, well, it should be left for the election. Well, the election, he lost. He simply lost. He just was not willing to admit defeat, and he became the first loser of an American presidential election to commit an insurrection rather than accept the results of our constitutional process. So all of which points to that this issue of of kicking Trump out of power is a central battlefield in a larger battle, which has got to do with whether democracy or fascism is going to rule the United States of America, that has been for a few generations considered the leader of the free world, at least by some people, including by me, at least in some meaningful ways. A lot of people on my liberal side of the spectrum are very attached to differentiating themselves from the American patriotic pride thing, because after all, we have a very patchy record in terms of being good and evil. Not everything in American society is great. We got racism. Not everything in American big power actions has been great. We've made some lousy decisions, like in Vietnam, and we've shown a certain kind of ruthless imperialistic impulse at times, like the invasion of Iraq. So I've written about that, but I think that it's important not to ignore that in some important ways, the United States has been the leader of the free world, patchy record and all. Well, anyway, the Supreme Court is going to be hearing this case, and most people seem to think it's going to find an off ramp. The Constitution says it should be he should be disqualified, but they're not going to want to do it. Um, and my original thought it goes like this: that a lot of people who suspect that the court will be pro-Trump. Um, I'll make a different case that I've been observing the process by which this court got constituted. I've been observing since 1980s that the plutocracy has been working all these decades to create a court like what they've got now. John Roberts, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, sure about the blocking that name too. You can picture, Amy Comey Barrett. I'm not sure how much she's a corporatist, but we know that Clarence Thomas, has been was granted his desire to be a super rich guy in terms of his lifestyle by a billionaire whose interests he often has to pass on. And Alito is, I don't know. I mean, he seems to be more of a theocrat. He's a sort of American Ayatollah type guy, more than a corporate. But I think that they've all been groomed to be in alignment with a plutocratic power, which is basically what has run the Republican establishment. It's forever. I mean, and since the Republican Party of the late 19th century, that created a pretty good corporatist Supreme Court to keep the Constitution from being used to allow people to organize unions. Well, so it's a part of the Republican Party, but I don't. Not in our lifetime have we ever had a court that was so lacking in jurisdictional principle. This is a highly partisan court. It has exposed itself, made decisions like on gun control and on abortion and on voting rights. I mean, they've made absurd statements like, "Oh, we can open the floodgates to money, and that will have no effect on money corrupting the democratic process." I mean, you'd have to be stupid, and of course, they're not stupid. What they are is they're corrupt. In addition to voting rights, what's the other? Oh yeah. Oh. So in addition to Citizens United, which opened the floodgates to money, there's the voting rights decision where they gutted the provision that allowed the U.S. Justice Department to monitor what former Confederate states were doing with voting rights in order to protect against the impulse that's been in the South forever to keep black people from having a voice in their government. They created the fiction. I'm so disgusted about this court. They created the fiction that it wasn't, that we don't need that anymore. They looked out over the Confederacy and they said, that's not a problem anymore. So they struck down certain aspects of the Voting Rights Act, and it just, practically overnight, I think it was Texas and North Carolina passed laws to to reduce the political power of the black citizenry. I mean, they didn't put it in those terms, uh, but there are measures you can take whose purpose is to um, not proportionately impact the kinds of people who vote for Republicans and the kinds of people who vote for Democrats. They knew, they had to know, they're not stupid, they're corrupt. So I think that here's that original thought I promised you. I mean, it's original. At least I haven't come across it anywhere. Um, I think that we have a lot of knowledge that the Republican establishment um, would like to be rid of Trump. I mean, you can see that in Mitch McConnell's behavior since for a long time. Trump is a problem for Mitch McConnell. I think Mitch McConnell pretty much represents, the Republican Party per se. And we know that I think that though there are probably some crazy guys out there and sociopaths, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, maybe they are truly delighted to have be part of a political party that's run by a human monster like Trump. But I think we know that the Republican Party as something which is it has been the instrument of the plutocracy. I think we know that the people in Congress are not happy to be enthralled to Donald Trump. They've got a problem, though. Donald Trump so completely commands the majority of the Republican base that he can kill off, politically speaking, not being yet a dictator for a day, he can kill off people politically if they oppose him. He did it to early on to Sanford from South Carolina. Liz Cheney has been killed off. And everybody in the party knows, and I don't know when this came true and when anyway, they've been subservient since 2017. He's got their political, his boot on their political neck. And so they serve him. They'll acquit him in an impeachment trial, disgracefully, the most impeachable president you could practically imagine, but they'll acquit him because they're afraid of the base. And right after January 6th, they made some of those people made an assumption and made speeches that you get played over and over again on MSNBC because it shows that they know full well what a criminal is controlling their party. But they thought that he had lost control because, after all, who the hell is going to rally to the support of somebody who committed those kinds of crimes right in front of us, the most serious crimes in American history? But they misjudged, just like they did with the Hollywood Access tape. Donald Trump has got a hold on people that even the Republican establishment has sometimes misjudged. So it turned out that the base stuck with Trump, despite their seeing him try to pull off an insurrection. Whether they saw what was happening and felt fine about it, or whether somehow, even though it was as obvious as could be, this guy is doing this thing, that is the question that continues to flummox me. I don't know. I don't know how that breaks down. But in any event, there are these people. It's really bizarre. But most Americans are not. Most Americans are not in that position of either being in somehow enslaved to either whatever he says is okay or whatever he says is true, even when there's a mountain of evidence to contradict it. Well, anyway, we got to get rid of this guy. And if he does become president, it seems quite clear that that would be a substantial blow to American democracy, maybe a fatal blow. And the plutocracy is in a different position with respect to the Republican Party. Now, if the Republican Party would like to be free, that probably means that the plutocracy would like to be free. And even though they can make out fairly well in a lot of ways with Trump as president, I mean, they got the $1 trillion giveaway, which is, another abomination back in 2017, that tax cut. Even at the precisely wrong moment in the business cycle to give that kind of a stimulus anyway, it was just a nakedly corrupt thing to take money and power from average Americans and give it to the most powerful and rich. It was the plutocracy at work, and Trump was happy to sign it. But I think that we can imagine that the way Trump operates, even if he's willing to sign a $2 trillion giveaway, he's continually making dramas that are not really the way you would want to design the play if you're interested in advancing the plutocracy. I mean, it's compatible, but Trump has his own. He's governed by his own narcissistic needs. He needs attention. He needs to be humiliating people. He has no interest. He has no vision for how to move the country in any direction. He's not interested in moving the country in any direction any more than he was. I mean, it wasn't good for America to have a president like that at the time of the pandemic. I mean, if we have an extra 200,000 deaths, that doesn't help the plutocracy. And, everything going somewhat worse, something which puts, that inflicts a wound on the economy, businesses closing and people are thrown out of work. That's not you want. You want an ally in the White House, but you'd rather have it be somebody who knows how to play the game to get things done that give more power to the plutocracy. Somebody like Mitch McConnell, not not like a human robot, but an effective. And there are people like that that might be found in the Republican Party that like John Roberts, is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who I mean he's a very appealing seeming guy. I think what he's done with the Constitution, with those kinds of decisions like voting rights and in Citizens United, I think it's got him marked as he's basically an agent of the plutocracy. So are most of the other Republican appointed judges. But the original thought base, again, is that these people, if they are agents of the plutocracy, as I think they are, they're not there to serve Trump. They have an opportunity to get rid of Trump, and they're the only ones who are not vulnerable to having the Trump base weaponized against them. They're not going to get primaried. They got lifetime appointments. Now, maybe they'll feel like they could be targeted in some other respect, as has been leading to Trump getting these. What are they called? Anyway, he's got to keep his mouth shut and stop threatening witnesses and judges and such. Yeah, maybe they're worried about. They'd worry about that. I don't know how much courage they'd have, at that level. Jack Smith has got that much courage. Chuck King's got that much courage. but they wouldn't. In terms of if they're going to make a partisan decision, and I've asserted that I see this court as unusually partisan. In fact, they may be the most partisan court. Did I say church a minute ago? The most partisan court since the Dred Scott decision, in which a whole bunch of Supreme Court justices, either who were slave owners or were tied in with that political force, handed down a hugely partisan decision, going way out of their way to such an extreme that there's a line there that the black person has no rights that the white person is bound to respect. That was partisan. This court is partisan like that. But if they're going to make a partisan decision, there's no reason to think they're going to make it on a pro-Trump basis. They may be tempted to obey the Constitution, but really, I mean, that's how it would be expressed. Not find an off-ramp, but actually to say, well, the Constitution plainly says, as I think is well argued in these briefs, that he can't run for president. But the real reason for doing that would be they can be the hitmen for the plutocracy. Kill off this guy who's somebody they may think that they can live with, just like the German capitalist class thought that they were going to be able to control another leader that came to power in 1933, and it didn't turn out well in that situation. I don't think Trump is. He doesn't have the same kind of motivation. He doesn't have a program except for feeding his own malignant narcissistic self, and doesn't, I don't think, call for doing what this other leader did in Germany in the 30s. I could really be wrong about that. The thing about Hitler was he was murderous. I've thought a lot about how is Trump like and not like Hitler, and there are a lot of similarities, but a central difference is Trump is not murderous. I came around to thinking that the court should, contrary to the op-ed that I published October, I think, I came back with another one saying I was wrong, because I read Timothy Snyder writing about basically criticizing the approach that I was taking. I mean, not like he knew it from me, but I wasn't the only person who was somewhat leery of having him taken off the political stage by judicial fiat. But he said, Snyder said, and I found this persuasive, that allowing the fear of an insurrection, and that was basically, I was afraid of political violence, wanted to minimize the chances of any widespread political violence. He says that is already conceding power to the insurrectionary spirit. I mean, that wasn't his language, but that was the idea that basically you get more insurrections if that kind of threat has the effect of moving, like me. Oh, how about the court pass on doing this because I'm afraid of an insurrection? He persuaded me that basically the place to take a stand is we are a country that abides by the Constitution. That is what we are. And that's what Trump wasn't. And so the court needs to take a stand. And I'm persuaded of that. I think that they really should take that stand. It's my consequentialist morality says, well, what are all the consequences and how does this way and that way? I'm persuaded at that level, but then there is a certain uncertainty. Okay, well, if you get rid of Trump, then who do you get on the running against Biden? You know, the Republican Party's the problem with the Republican Party isn't just that it's under the sway of Trump. It was quite toxic and sick for a long time before Trump came to power, hijacked the party, and so I mean, I don't know who the Republicans would put forward. Would it be Nikki Haley? I mean, I find her appealing, but she is not okay. I mean, she looks good and she seems to have a certain humanity, but uh, she's got a record you can look at, and it tells me that if she were president, we would have this sick Republican Party in power. I mean, not all Republicans would be sick, though I'm not impressed with much of any of them except for maybe Liz Cheney. I mean, Mitt Romney comes in, you know, at least he's manifested destiny. Destiny, you are my density. Decency is what I was looking for. I mean, he was the only one vote against to convict Trump, the only Republican in that first impeachment. And he said things that were quite decent. But as far as I'm concerned, he did not do what I would have had a truly decent man of his stature and his position do. Once he was elected to senator, I would have had him be a full-time voice in the wilderness. Play like John the Baptist denouncing Herod. I would have had if I had been in Mitt Romney's place. That's what I would have done. And he didn't do anything of the sort. He just was being an occasional manifester of decency. So I don't think I don't know who the Republicans would put forward. I don't think it would be DeSantis at this point. Maybe Nikki Haley's as good a guess as any. But she went up against Trump, and the Trump world is going to be angry with her because she started taking things too far in ways which the Democrats are going to be using in the fall campaign. So, this is a completely screwed up political party. Screwed up is really doesn't do justice to the situation. But anyway, in terms of consequences, if Nikki Haley does get to be Biden's opponent, I'm a bit worried. I don't know. I mean, I really like the idea of Biden running against Trump. Biden has weaknesses, not some of which are not his fault. Others, what's his fault? Fault. I mean, he's just such a mediocre speaker, and he's got so little charisma. He's not able to command the attention and open-heartedness of the American people the way it would really help if he could. But he's our champion out there. I do feel that whether Trump is on the ballot or not, the best thing that can happen in this upcoming election is for Biden to win by a landslide, and for this Republican Party that's made itself the instrument of a fascist human monster be driven a long distance toward what's the word? Not obscurity? No, it's a little further than that. Toward non-existence. I mean, we need a different Republican Party altogether. This has been building for a generation, and it's not going to be healed overnight, but we really need to start getting a decent Republican Party. I would just love to see this election be, I think I mentioned in an earlier, the blowouts like 1936 and 1964 and 1972. The loser got 40% or so in all those blowouts. Alf Landon, Barry Goldwater, and George McGovern, and respectively. I'd love to see the Republican Party go into this campaign as the Trump Party and take a 2-to-1 beating. Be optimistic. Love to see it, and it doesn't seem to me absolutely inconceivable. So I get a little scared about the idea of the Supreme Court saying take Trump off the ballot, because maybe that means this Republican Party will regain control of the White House, and I don't see any good scenarios with that. There was something wrong with the Republican Party. If the base of the party in 2015 took a look at Donald Trump and said, oh, yeah, that's the guy we want to have wielding the powers of the presidency. I mean, he was a perfect model of who you don't want to have wielding the power of the presidency, a bully, a liar, a cheat. A guy who doesn't play by the rules, a guy who doesn't care about anybody but himself. All that was obvious, but the Republican base said, yeah, he's our guy. I mean, 40% of them chose him above all the others, enough to make him the nominee, and then most of the others, 60% came. So we really need to destroy this Republican Party, and we also need to get Trump out of the off the political stage. I mean, he's just been a wantonly destructive force in almost every way that he's. I mean, he's who in American history has had a more of an impact as an individual. I've been thinking about that. Could you say that Abraham Lincoln did? George Washington. I mean, this guy is having a huge impact. It's hard to describe exactly how it relates to, the guys on Mount Rushmore. But he doesn't seem less important to me, and getting him off the stage is truly important. But he's also a symptom of what was wrong with the Republican Party. But anyway, on the issue of what the Supreme Court should do, I'm going to go with Tribe and the Republican ideal jurist, so hype, who's testified before Congress that Trump is a clear and present danger to American democracy. Really not a political issue here. This has got to do with the basic values of America, which has got to do with the basic way the power works in America, in which you've got the rule of law, in which the will of the people creates the government as its instrument, rather than the tyranny at the top of a top-down system exploits and manipulates the people. That's the basic question, and civilization has been dealing with that problem since the rise of the first civilizations. And you can go to my website, abetterhumanstory.org, and there are a variety of places. And then in the search box, put democracy versus fascism, and you'll see that I've done a lot of thinking about what's happening in the United States, what's been happening globally as democracy has been losing ground to fascism, and how that relates to the whole issue of how power has worked in civilized societies since the rise of the first cities and empires and tyrants, chronic war and enslavement. This is a very fundamental battle in the human world. It's got to do with how power works, and the Trump. The base that found Trump appealing had been formed by the likes of Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich and Fox News and Karl Rove into what Trump was able to hijack, because those other propagandistic forces had moved the Republican base into a really disturbing place where they could, where a substantial proportion of them could look at Donald Trump and say, yeah, let's give him the powers of the presidency. So we need to really to destroy this this party. But in the meanwhile, I think I'm willing to put aside my consequentialist hat because there's so much that I don't know. What would happen, and say, okay, if we're going to have to fight this fight against the fascist tendency to political violence and its refusal to play by the rules, let's have it out now. Let us have the Supreme Court make the decision. I'm talking about the should. I don't think this is going to happen, actually. I'll talk about it in a second. But I've come around to what Timothy Snyder and the others have said. The court should disqualify him. And if we have to fight a fight, let's fight it on the basis of we stand for the Constitution, the rule of law, American democracy, and we stand against the people seizing power just because they can, without being constrained by the rules that are necessary to prevent tyranny and a lot of human suffering. It's the ugliness we see in human history shows. And just to, we're trying to set up systems that can control the workings of power. And that's fundamental to my whole human story. One of the foundational idea of that human story I've developed in a video is about, it shows to be true the following: the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. I claim to be able to prove that because there emerges with the beginnings of civilization a systemic force that's not a function of the nature of the creature, and that drives civilization to develop in certain destructive directions, regardless of the nature of the creature. A destructive force emerges that drives civilization to develop in certain directions, which are fundamentally connected with the kind of thing we see in Putin's invasion of Ukraine and his using the Russian people as fodder for the meat grinder, if that metaphor works. And it's manifested in a Republican Party that makes itself the instrument of a man like Donald Trump, who's the worst human being I've ever really examined intensely. It's all connected because power has been a problem in social evolution, because the step onto the path of civilization is a step outside of one's place in the natural order that has evolved biologically for billions of years, in ways in which there's a synergy of all the various elements. You can see how they work together, but if you take a step out of that, then you don't have that synergy. On the one hand, you've got the I'll just go this much further with this idea. If you're interested, I lay it out as carefully as I can. You can summarize the natural order by saying the lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. Whereas when a creature extricates itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically, which our ancestors did about 10,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago, and began a process of becoming of emergent civilization, which happened in 6 different places on the planet. In every case, there are a lot of important commonalities of how it develops. And the reason for that commonality is that there's a selective process that grows out of the disorder that extricating oneself from a natural order inevitably entails. There is a war of all against all is inevitable, no matter what the kind of inherent nature, the creature that is making this civilization. So I say, for example, also, which goes with the idea that this ugliness we see around us isn't human nature at large. I also say that this has got to do with my belief that given the billions of galaxies and the billions of stars in each one, and all the planets that obviously we now know are going to be out there, well, there must be a lot of places where life has evolved, and a lot of those must be places where some kind of species emerged that had the creative intelligence to extricate itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically and launch itself on this process that we've been on this planet of the evolution of civilization, which has been substantially governed by an inevitable destructive selective force, which confers on what I call the spirit of the gangster, a disproportionate say on what civilization will become. So there must be a lot of them, and about them I say any creature on any planet that takes that step onto the path of civilization will inevitably find itself plunging into a social evolutionary process, the development of civilization along certain lines, as destructive and tormented as what we see in the pages of human history, and what we largely still can see when we look around the world that we're actually living in now. Any creature is an inherent. I claim to be able to show that the unprecedented step, unprecedented in the biological evolution of life on the planet, of inventing one's own way of life, inadvertently unleashes a certain kind of situation of disorder that leads to a war of all against all. And that's just inherent in the process. So any species that does that is going to find itself having a selective process, choosing the ways of power. Well, in other words, only those cultural options that can prevail in this situation that's inevitable, where it's a war of all against all. That brings me to talk about why it is that I think it's plausible that this mission I'm on could have a beneficial impact on where things go. And let me start by saying, that's very chutzpah-ish, but I actually believe it. And I also have I think a realistic notion of what ideally could possibly happen with this better human story. I think that it is conveying some truly important truths that put fundamental things in a different light, like what our nature is, why our story has been the way it has been, what is the nature of the challenges that we need to face if human civilizations to avoid self-destruction. I do believe in that this is something that should be incorporated into how our civilization understands who we are, where we are in the social evolutionary process, and what we got to do. I do believe that. But I've also studied how much impact any ideas ever have on the world. And I recognize that, it could get out there maybe as much as some other ideas have gotten out there. I do think that over the centuries, Copernicus's ideas, really had an impact, but it wasn't like everybody was thinking that way for a long time. And then I do think that what Darwin put out there, I think it's been huge. my work is an extent to make it more huge because almost everything I've got to say is something which is revealed if you look at things carefully enough in an evolutionary perspective. Anyway, I think Darwin has had a huge impact, but not nearly as huge as it should be. And it's more than a century and a half since he published The Origin of the Species. In the immediate decade, he made a big splash with his ideas, but the progress of his ideas for the next half century, was quite iffy and not always well conceived. And you know, I recognize that maybe what I have to offer, what could I hope for? Even ideally, Anyway, I've seen, for example, that Freud and Marx in the world that I got educated in, 50s and 60s and such. There are a lot of people who are looking at the human world through the perspective that those guys offered, and there were schools of thought and like that. And I guess that's basically you could see it in the movies and various other things. Both of those people had an impact, not just in having certain schools of thought, but a wider impact in the society, that people became, like with Freud, more aware of there being an unconscious dimension to the human life, that people didn't always know what they were doing and why they were doing it. And at the moment, I kind of wonder if our civilization now, I don't think we have a sufficient recognition of. I think we've lost something of that. But anyway, it was out there. I think that. So if it were to, if it's a toss-up, like I think it is, whether the human civilization will get its act together, or whether it'll destroy itself. That's my, I don't know. Some days I'm optimistic and some days I'm pessimistic. I'm just going to guess it's, like a 50-50. So there could be a tipping point. And so maybe if enough people were thinking about what we are, what we unleashed when we did what we were capable of doing, because we were the most creative species to emerge out of the evolution of life on Earth, and we inadvertently unleashed this thing. If we understood those things better, we would look at the challenges that we face different. Well, first of all, when I say the ugliness we see in human nature, in human histories, is not human nature writ large. That, I think, if people were to absorb that into it, if they were to say what we're seeing around here that's not what we are. That's what happens to human beings when they're compelled to live in a world which is inevitably beset by a force of brokenness. Because that breakthrough is a breakthrough into disorder, and out of that disorder comes a kind of brokenness. It says that this ugliness isn't something we should inject against ourselves. And if you look at our religious traditions in the West, that is fundamentally what our civilization has done with that question. It looks around and sees a lot of ugliness, creates mythologies about how disgusted God is with the creation he's made, and then singling out Noah, while he's going to exterminate the rest of them, because he even regrets having created human beings. Even beyond original sin, we got that story. A God that's so disgusted with us that somebody has to be crucified to have our sins washed away. Religions that talk a lot about human depravity. Jonathan Edwards and his Sinner in the Hand of an Angry God. We have internalized a heavy burden. When you hear people say, well, that's human nature, you'll notice that they're always pointing toward a frailty, a foible, a defect, a fault. They're never saying what a wonderful thing that humanity is. I, I struggle to think about the question, well, how wonderful a thing is our humanity, and how are we to look at human nature per se? Um, and I lack clarity on that, but I have clarity on the fact that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. That I claim that I can, to my satisfaction, prove. Proof is I like to use the word proof, and sometimes I feel abashed because, you know, um, if you think of mathematical proof, I don't have that level. But I don't see a way out of it in the argument that I laid out in getting my doctorate. Laid out in this book, The Parable of the Tribes, which I spent 14 years trying to make an irresistible argument. So we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be, and I believe that that will fortify us in itself to do better in advancing the forces that are life enhancing and not life destroying. We tend to live up or down to our expectations of ourselves. And if every time somebody says, well, that's human nature, they're talking about, this poor schlub of a species, you know, how take a look at Gulliver's Travels and see what Jonathan Swift thought about us. And we recognize a lot of that. The little people and the very big people, I mean, those are ways of looking at us. But these views grow out of a world in which the spirit of the gangster has had a disproportionate say in shaping the human world. And the destructive forces at work, a war of all against all, have inflicted a number of traumas and other injurious things on the people having to live in such a world. So, if you adopt a kitten or a puppy, it makes a difference what kind of environment they're going to grow up in. You can create monsters out of either the puppy or the kitten if you give them enough of a traumatic circumstance to grow up in. And it's even more so for the human being when we've got this massive capacity to absorb from our experience, to educate ourselves, so that the proportion between what we've come to understand and what we were born inherent within us, it's way tilted in the case of human beings. But you still can make a vicious dog out of a dog, or you can make that same puppy into. So think about what we are, and what we are ain't what we see. We know we're better than that. That's one of the things the evolutionary perspective helps to bring into it. Once you see that there's a social evolutionary force that emerges, which is what the parable of the tribes is about, and what I lay out in a variety of ways on a betterhumanstory.org. Once you see that is an inescapable, I often use the word inevitable component of what happens when you step across that line, you're going to unleash a destructive force. And our chances of beating this destructive force before it destroys us. And we've gotten to be such a powerful civilization that we no longer can afford for destructiveness to be such a major player on the human stage, because it could end up with a nuclear holocaust, or we could destroy the planet because the systems of greed, run by greed, have prevented us from controlling our destructive impact on the biosphere. We need to understand all that in order to defeat it. And once we see that there's a destructive force that has been moving through the human world and forming, having an impact on things that results sometimes in wars, sometimes in injustice, sometimes in cruelty, and sometimes, and the evolutionary perspective also shows that in addition to this destructive force that gets unleashed when a species extricates itself from the natural order and falls into disorder, the evolutionary perspective shows that there's a different way we should understand ourselves that has a result about that leads to the conclusion through several steps that the moral dimension is real, important, and life-serving, because it is founded in our experience, and our experience, we have inborn experiential tendencies that the fact that they're there is irrefutable evidence that they were advantageous for our ancestors, that those who had those tendencies were more likely to get their DNA into the future. So the experiential realm is one of the ways in which the world of life and death has projected itself into our nature. We are by nature, for example, experiencing those things positively that in our ancestral past, it was good for us to be motivated to seek those things out, because those behaviors were conducive to survival and to passing one's DNA along more successfully than the people who didn't have that positive, negative experience spectrum built into them to help motivate them to do what needed to be done for life to continue. And here we are with these experiential tendencies. I really find this whole experiential tendencies to be both intriguing and significant. It's significant because, as I was saying, the secular worldview, as I conceive of it, I mean, I've been interacting with it and learning from it. So I think it's a major component in what people believe now, having to do with logic and evidence. The secular worldview needs to be enriched in some important ways by extricating out of that evolutionary perspective some important truths. One of them is that there is such a thing as a better and a worse. That value emerges into the cosmos. And I don't know what there is before life. Behind it, it's all mysterious to me. But I operate on only on what science tells us. We got cosmic evolution. We got the molecules out there in space that are sort of building blocks. We got the planet forming, and then we get self-replicating. I don't have any idea that there's anything else going on. And so it's a world that's just operating according to, sort of like natural selection rules of things that come together and that self-replicate, and we're off to the races under the right conditions. And how narrow those right conditions are, that people disagree about. You got to have water, you got to have carbon. I mean, I don't know but that's what seems to happen on this planet, and probably happened a lot of places. eventually, when you've got something which selects for what can survive, pass its DNA into the future, one of the strategies that it finds is to select for creatures who can have a positive experience or a negative experience. Anyway, I'm not going to, I've done that on other videos, and I do it on betterhumanstory.org. I'm just going to say there is a better and a worse. Value is an emergent dimension as life develops, and it creates creatures like us, but not only like us. My kitties have got the better and the worse. And the only meaningful way there you could, the only thing that value could mean is a value is registering as a positive experience by those creatures that can experience better and worse. If there were no creatures that experience the better and worse, there could be no value. What does it matter? If there's nothing to whom anything can matter, then nothing can matter. But evolution produces creatures in whom value comes into existence. And from that, you can derive an idea that the good is meaningful in an evolutionary perspective. It's meaningful in terms of in the form of survival. Life is good rather than death. That's something I might want to discuss because is that true? But in any event, here we are with life. And once we've got life like us, what's good is for creatures to have positive experience, to find fulfillment rather than misery and agony and all those things. A kitten being stroked and purring is better than a kitten being tortured. And the secular worldview has been rather slow. No, that's the wrong way to put it. My mouth was just running. Sorry about that. It has mistaken the value-free nature of the objective world for the absence of value, because it has dismissed the experiential realm as merely subjective. A lot of it's subjective, but a lot of it isn't merely subjective, and one of those things has got to do with value. We're not, all human beings aren't exactly the same, but I feel completely confident that if you look at all the human beings, we have a huge amount of overlap from, among the 8 billion of us. There is, some kind of a complex picture with a real core you could see in the middle of what our humanity consists of, with variations on it, between the timid and the bold and all that stuff. We've got a human nature. And it has been structured to get us to value things that help us do what we need to do to survive, and that there is an overlap between what life requires and what our fulfillment is, and what we need to be doing is trying to make sure that the human world that we construct works at the macro level and also fulfills the human needs that we have evolved to have. That allows fulfilling life, whereas we live in a world in which there's a real mixture, but there's a lot of suffering, and maybe human nature is such that we would, not be in continual ecstasy, but one can and should aspire to a world in which people find as much of fulfillment as we are built to be able to find. And I, for one, have experienced that human life can be a really a lovely thing. It's more challenging, and I think than I might want, but because we are mortal, for example. But I think a lot of the challenges in my life have been because the human world is more broken than I wish it were. And partly that meant when I grew up in my family, like 2 generations from the pogroms, just to name one aspect of brokenness in my background, I incorporated and was shaped by experiences that made life more difficult than it necessarily had to be for the zygote that I started out as being. Um, but still, I'm ready to say, let's. Human life has great capacities for being a wonderful thing, and life in general. It's not just human life. We should be defining into the good. There are lots of other values at work that having to do with like the extinction of species inflicted on them by a species whose behavior is not giving adequate respect to the rest of life on Earth. Hmm. There is a good, and there's also a spiritual dimension that, in the secular worldview that I'm aware of, is also given second-class status. My Better Human Story includes this piece, which is that if you look at human populations and human cultures, I think it can be established as an empirical fact that a certain proportion of people that's very, very widespread throughout the human world and cultures and such. The, there is a capacity that some people manifest importantly in their lives at one or more points of having a spiritually transformative experience. Yeah. Now, value human beings share with, I don't know how far you go with better and worse experientially. Every mammal, certainly. I don't know where, but with respect to spiritually transformative experience, which is a fact, that capacity for that is clearly built into the human genome. And I don't know if there are other species. Did that just start emerging when human beings started on their special path, or would you find that there are moments in the life of some elephants or chimpanzees or gorillas or dolphins, whatever? I don't know. But human beings do have these experiences, and that capacity is part of humanity as evolution has created it. And that, again, raises the question, why would that be selected for? And I know that not every single thing that we can see in ourselves is shows that it was selected for. I mean, people talk about our tailbone, but that's really, it's a vestigial remnant of something that was selected for when we were, primates further back. But anyway, but I don't think that either value the good, the moral dimension, or spiritually transformative experience, which is a special inborn capacity for a kind of experience that has a great impact that impresses a person as being a fundamental and deep reality, from experience from which people return often with what they regard as really big truths, maybe called spiritual truths, and that the experience can be seen in some kind of a tale of the person's whole life, that at that experience there was a change of course. It was impactful. This is just empirical facts. It's widespread. And if it's widespread, then I think you can infer that it must have been selected for. And if it was selected for, it must be that those impacts, those messages, were life-serving. it helped them get their DNA into the future and make us what we are. The experiential realm is part of what we are by nature. All kinds of culture and individual stuff, is part of that. But the natural core is not without substance. Why would evolution miss a chance to shape us, to have a motivational structure to want to do the things that help us survive, like eat and reproduce and all that kind of stuff? But much more than that, too. And why would evolution shape us so that a certain proportion of our population will be having experiences that are of this magnitude and depth and profundity and nature? Well, it must have been, in both cases, it increased their chances of getting into the survival and getting their DNA into the future. And think of what that means. It means that people were led in directions that turned out to be advantageous that they might not have taken if they hadn't had this spiritually transformative experience, and to come back with truths which maybe they share with the rest of their community that didn't have the experience, but they can be moved by the experience. And you can see that happening in cultures all over the world, from Siberian shamans to the religious texts of full civilizations. It must be that the impact of those things took them in directions that made them more likely to get their DNA into the future. That's the evolutionary game. Get your DNA into the future. And if that's the case, that means that in this spiritual realm, we could at least have a presumption, though our circumstances may have changed in ways that make us have to take a closer look. There must be a presumption that that was a place from which important messages came that should be heeded. So the moral dimension that has to do with the better and the worse, and it's better to have a kitten purring than have a kitten being tortured, that gets put together also with the spiritual dimension, where we will have some among us who will somehow have some kind of an experience which probability would seem to have it that it really warrants our paying attention to it. That would have an impact on the secular worldview, it seems to me. Let me make what looks like a big leap, but I don't think it is. I mean, it's one of my big frustrations over the past 30 years, and especially over the past 20 years, is that liberal America has been so slow to recognize what was rising on the other side of the political divide. It was not hidden, really, but there was a lack of recognition that there is something different happening there. And part of that was, I'm pretty convinced that when things that were really always in the direction of worse were being said and done by the other political party, increasingly from the rise of Gingrich on, if they didn't take the whole better and worse dimension of things seriously, because it's merely subjective and merely a matter of opinion, they would be very slow to be inspired to fight the fight that needed to be fought. So they forfeited battle after battle while this thing rose. And likewise with the spiritual dimension. There's a dimension of things which I claim that I can show of an interaction between two coherent forces. It can be seen in an evolutionary perspective, the one like I'm suggesting, that really deserves to be perceived in terms quite reasonable to call a good and evil. If you don't like the terms, let's just say there are two coherent forces, one consistently working to make things more broken in the human world, and I can show it, and the other, contrary-wise, working to make things more whole, better in the human world. And you can see that these two things arise. One arises out of this destructive social evolutionary force, and then the other one comes out of these life-serving things that are built into us that need to be taken a lot more seriously than the secular worldview has generally done. And the secular worldview, I think, is a central part of liberal America. It doesn't take things like God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. It needs to arrive at its conclusions in an intellectually responsible way. Look at the evidence, apply reasoning or logic to it to see what does the evidence show. Well, for example, the evidence shows in a million different ways that life has been shaped by the process of evolution. I mean, it's not really up for questioning, however much the creationists are uncomfortable with what it does with their God said it bumper sticker. But there's also can be extrapolated from that dynamic a perspective on what's happened to the civilization creating species. And that's what the better human story is about. It shows that that we are engaged in a fundamental battle that it would inevitably beset any civilization creating creature. Because by creating civilization, leaving the natural order, it unleashes a destructive force. But because it has been shaped by an evolutionary prospect that's continually choosing life over death, and thereby is also choosing to have us feel fulfilled when we do things that have been life-serving in our ancestral past, evolutionary perspective tells us honor these dimensions because we have been equipped with something which constitutes a constructive force, a force of wholeness, a force that we can tap into in our struggle against this other thing that we unwittingly unleashed that acts as if it were a force of evil, as humankind has often conceived of it in the religious traditions, a coherent force that consistently works to make things more broken, but without anything supernatural. Something that you can see in as an inevitable systemic dynamic that emerges, that can be discerned in the web of the inevitable causes and effects that are woven together in that civilizational system as it unfolds over the generations and centuries and millennia. That basically there's going to be a battle between life and death, basically, good and evil, what's life-serving and what's life-degrading, between a force of wholeness and a force of brokenness. It's an inevitable duality that emerges out of a civilization, any creature's civilization. And We need all the fortification we can get. And my Better Human Story provides several different forms of fortification. We'll think better of ourselves. We'll pay more attention to some of the sources of guidance that we have within us. And we'll understand more clearly just what it is we're up against. We're up against something which is very complex and multidimensional. And the healing of the world is going to have to be very complex and multidimensional. But it also shines a light on, well, I don't know if I want to keep going down that avenue. Maybe I'll come back to the more concrete right now, which is let me look at the problem in Gaza, which is, again, we're dealing here with at the very foundation the same basic drama, a battle between a force of brokenness and a force of wholeness. You can assume that if you looked at all the things which led up to what the Hamas did on October 7th, you would see all kinds of brokenness feeding into that grotesque, bloody drama. I mean, the face of evil is there if it's anywhere. And when you look at all the forces that are resulting in that, it's got to do with all the brokenness that's within Hamas that could lead to making such a decision to make use of such a dramatization of evil in order to achieve their political purposes. It was very clever. Nobody said evil wasn't smart. And I think it's been very successful thanks to the brokenness on the Israeli side. I mean, Hamas set a trap for Israel, put them in really kind of an impossible situation because there's the impulse to strike back and reasons to strike back. And then there's the reality that the people you want to strike back at that just committed these atrocities in such atrocious ways. I mean, it just makes me sick to think of what the things that they did. I mean, it was deliberately as provocative as they possibly could be, with ugliness, cruelty, evil. How do you respond to that when you couldn't be more provoked? Well, I don't pretend to know just what the most wise Israeli conceivable decision makers would or would have done. Very difficult situation. But I do feel quite confident in the 90%. I just don't think I'm wrong about this. What the Israelis have done was not the wisest course available to them. There are all kinds of things that could have been done, but I think this was going just headlong into the trap that Hamas obviously had in mind for them to jump into. Hamas's intention is for Israel to go out of existence. I don't know a better way you could do it than to get the Israelis to do what they've done to Gaza. I don't think that their intention was genocidal, but this is a fascist government in Israel, headed by a man who's shown in various ways in recent years that he is willing to injure his country even to protect himself, not like somebody we know about the States center stage, who has put together for his own, he has sacrificed the political health of his country to get a coalition that Israel should never, ever be governed by, with people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, these Jewish Nazis, people who encourage the settlers to commit their pogroms, and just as much ugliness as you expect from fascists. And they've got kind of veto power over Netanyahu's staying in power. And for him, staying in power likely means also staying out of jail. And the polls are showing that if an election were held today, he would be out. His party would be cut back beyond, way lower than it's been for forever. The Likud party would be way out of power. And the anti-Netanyahu faction would be, what was it, 66 or 68 seats out of 120. And that's with 5 uncommitted. So Netanyahu's side would barely have 50 seats in the Knesset. I mean, that's an electoral disaster that Trump, the Israelis' version of Trump would face. And so, and the Israelis want him out of power, but they don't want to do that until this war is settled. So what kind of an incentive is that for this selfish man? Well, keep the war going. So between his selfishness and the fascistic nature of his coalition, and the fascistic way they have of regarding the Palestinians, they're incapable of doing anything but going after the people who struck them. And let the chips fall where they may, which is falling pretty much where you would. I'm imagining that Hamas envisioned them doing just this thing. So we have the same problem of a force of brokenness that shapes first Hamas into this evil thing, and then the worst part of Israel is in power right now. I've been to Israel. I've talked about that on other videos, and I think it's just a wonderful, wonderful country in a great many ways, an enormous accomplishment in a great many ways, afflicted with significant forms of brokenness that have also emerged out of the consequences of becoming a Jewish state in an area where the Muslim Arabs don't accept that. And emerging much more broken as the decades have gone by, because they got invaded in 48, and they got invaded. Well, they invaded them. They did the invading in 56, but then they got invaded again, and they're about to be invaded in 67 by all their neighbors, and then they did get invaded in 73 by all their neighbors, and the whole thing was no, 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 no. By the time we get to Menachem Begin, the first really conservative American Israeli government, we got a mensch, but he's a really hawkish mensch. Sadat came to Egypt, and Menachem Begin greeted him. Golda Meir said, "Why couldn't you have come when we were in power?" Because that would have been a more whole part of Israel. There's a very brilliant spirit in Israel that can, I think, still prevail. I don't know exactly what that scenario looks like. These same polls show that the leader I thought would be preferred by the Israelis, a guy named Lapid, who seems perfectly good to me and I think would be humane and wiser. Well, apparently he's not seen by Israelis as the guy they want to have as their prime minister. Maybe sooner this fellow Gantz, who's in the unity government. But I'm not, anyway, it's not clear how you get from here to there. So the forces of wholeness are working very hard to try to resolve this thing. We've got this whole effort to come up with some big package that results in a ceasefire, more humanitarian this and that, release of hostages, connection between Israel and Saudi Arabia, making some movements in the direction of a two-state solution, a whole package of things with something for everyone. And it's not going to happen as far as I can see. I mean, they're trying to, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I could be wrong. But Hamas has just come back with principles with respect to the proposal that was on the table, and I looked at some of those proposals, and there's no way that, I mean, it seems like that's just unthinkable that the Israelis would agree to all that. No, not going to happen. And then Netanyahu has dismissed it out of hand. I think even a decent Israeli prime minister would have dismissed it out of hand. But when I put what the Hamas people came back with together with what that coalition and its prime minister have already shown us about the choices they make, I don't think they're at all interested in coming up with such a package. They'd love to have that connection with the Saudi Arabians, but they're not going to be interested in relinquishing their dream of a greater Israel. These people who have control over Netanyahu, who dream that Judea and Samaria is going to be theirs. And maybe there's even some like ethnic cleansing in there. You know, this is not a group of people who are going to, in order to get something that Joe Biden wants, they're not going to make any concession on that that I can see. I think that there's that this prime minister and this government need to be changed for this region to die down. I'm not particularly frightened at the moment that the whole business about the killing of the Americans and this, to me, surprisingly powerful American. I don't think that that's going to lead to a wider war. That's another thing I'd be ready to discuss, but maybe I'll probably skip that in this conversation. But I do think that so long as the war is going on in a serious way, in which the civilian population of Gaza is being subjected to terrible threats of being killed and terrible conditions that are challenging them about at the level of mere survival, it's going to be a continual disturbance in the regional dynamic. I think the Houthi have said that they'll stop attacking shipping in the Red Sea when the Gaza civilians cease to be under the barrage of deadly violence that they are, as the Israelis just put an absolute priority on defeating Hamas and destroying it as much as possible. And I don't even know how realistic that is, how much success they're having. I've always been dubious about the could do it, but in any event, I think that the Houthi might mean it. If the violence stopped for a good long period of time, things could settle back down. So I think it'd be really good to get some kind of an agreement. And Joe Biden, I think, has been pushing for all the right things. I fault him for not using American leverage more aggressively on the Israeli thing. But if I had been president, I believe that I would have withheld some of the aid. I would have dramatized much more openly and had more consequences connected with it. That I did not approve that the Netanyahu government was continually not doing what I said needed to be done. I wouldn't have signed a blank check it looks like Biden had signed. That's the trouble with Biden. It's been the trouble with liberal America in general. We just don't play hardball readily enough. But anyway, right now, if I were in Joe Biden's shoes, and you'd be surprised how long I've been playing the game of what would I do if I were president, or what would I? Yeah, I've been doing it for a very long time, and I have an idea of what I would do if I were Biden. Maybe he's done it. You don't know what kind of advice he's getting, but I would be asking the best minds in the government for this particular question, and um, there would be people from the CIA. There would be people from the State Department. There would be the ambassador to Israel. There would be former ambassadors to Israel. There would probably be some professors. There would be people in the National Security Council. And I would ask them, what is there a good strategy to precipitate the fall of Netanyahu and his government? Is that something that we can accomplish where the likely benefits look like they greatly outweigh any costs of our doing it that way? How can we use the cards that are in our hands to get this obstacle out of the way so that Israel can have a government that is decent, as is, I think, a majority of the Israeli people. As I say, I love Israel. And then I would listen to that conversation. It's possible, that the result of that conversation would be, no, there's nothing we can do. Whenever I think about policy, to me, it's always like, I don't like these policy discussions that are like, you either do this or you do that. It seems to me that in the devising of policy, it's an art form. You can craft combinations of things. And I really admired what Biden crafted as a combination at the beginning of this crisis. He put himself out there so magnificently to the Israeli people. He inspired them to think they had a true friend of their heart who felt with them, who actually grieved with them in their loss, who knew what it was like. And there's a sign that got put up in Tel Aviv, basically expressing gratitude to the American president. I mean, that's huge. And he bought himself the standing to start saying, let's think about this. Don't act fast. Let's think about what comes after. Let's think about, minimizing casualties of innocent civilians, et cetera, et cetera. I thought that was a very, very impressive combination. Actually, I thought it was a diplomatic tour de force. Like, I'd never seen anything composed of that kind of sequence of such different levels of operation. But then there came a point where, because of this Netanyahu government, it wasn't working. I think that if there had been a decent Israeli government in place when Netanyahu did, when Biden did that wonderful diplomatic two-step, I think that it would have worked. I think that the Israeli government would have agreed to certain things and done certain things, like at the very minimum. Whatever you got to do in Gaza, and that's a big question. But even if you had to do everything that got done in Gaza, you need to at least combine it with some real reversals terrible policy toward the Palestinians in the West Bank. Things that were happening between the settlers and the Palestinians are simply not acceptable in a decent nation. But this is Netanyahu government, including some of the previous Netanyahu governments. Just not good. And then when you got to this government and you got to the violence that the settlers were inflicting on the Palestinian villages, you know, this would be a place where any decent new Israeli government would combine whatever they had to do in Gaza with a real strong message of we care about the decent the rights of the Palestinian people. The Netanyahu government, I don't think, has done a thing to convey a genuine human concern about the well-being and rights and Palestinian people, and an aspiration that there be a time in the future, two-state solution, but at least to say a time in the future where, and then you describe something which has got to do with, what you wish for people you care about in terms of well-being. Biden didn't put on the leverage that I think could. I mean, you go to my website, abetterhumanstory.org, you will see that I have a whole series of pieces that I operate under the title, Press the Battle. And that has got to do with how the Democrats have handled the Republican Party as it's become this destructive and now openly fascistic thing. But it applies to Joe Biden. He didn't press the battle with Netanyahu. And I'm pretty sure that I would have if I ran the zoo. And it's an art form, and I would say, I think it probable that that Biden could act in ways that at least lean significantly toward the toppling of this government. There could be combinations of various aid given or withheld, statements made, actions taken or not taken, that could help move whatever it is in the direction of the Israeli people getting to the point where there would be a new election. And I don't know exactly what that would look like, but that's what I would ask if I were Joe Biden. In that same vein, I would look back the big showdown. Will Inauguration Day in 2025 be the inauguration of Joe Biden to his second term, or the return of Donald Trump to power? That's what our drama is centered around. And I wish that Joe Biden were a press the battle kind of a guy. One of the things I heard in my obsessive following of all the developments in all the different arenas is that so many people who support Trump believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump by Joe Biden. I've talked a lot about how mystified I am that any intelligent people can believe that in the face of all the evidence. I mean, it is really an extraordinary phenomenon. I have trouble reconciling myself to the likelihood that I will go to my grave having spent 20 years watching something unfold and having a mystery at the very core of it. But however it happened, if I had been in Joe Biden's shoes, playing actually being president, when I drive from here to almost anywhere, I drive past a neighbor with that's got a sign that's been there since inauguration of Joe Biden. It says "illegit president." That same household used to have a sign that they put up. They're homemade signs. I trust Trump. It's just a reminder of how can you trust Trump? He's betrayed everything, always. Porn stars, national security with the Ukrainians, stiffing the contractors. I mean, I trust Trump. It's just, how do you do that? Anyway, going back to the illegit president thing, Joe Biden has been president. He was president-elect 3 days after the election, I think on a Saturday, the 7th or something. He was president-elect. Because of Trump refusing to concede defeat, it got confirmed and confirmed and confirmed and confirmed, court case after court case, recount after recount. And all the way up to the insurrection. And then, incredibly, even in the wake of the insurrection, Donald Trump jumps back into the spotlight and tells the Republican, continues to tell the American world that the election was stolen. So here we are in an election in which the fundamental choice is between democracy and fascism. And we got tens of millions of people who believe that the man who's the spearhead of a fascistic force threatening to take over and destroy American democracy, that he's really the legit president. And the guy who's in the White House is illegit, like my neighbor evidently believes. I mean, I assume that they actually do believe it. I mean, you wouldn't put a sign like that out there just to knowingly support a lie. But anyway, there are so many people who believe it that could be way more than we can afford in order to avoid having fascism take over the United States of America, the one-time free leader of the free world, and side with Putin in his invasion against Ukraine, and be buddy up with the fascistic leader of Hungary, and think that Rocket Man in North Korea is a cool guy. We don't want. So you press the battle. And what I would have done, and this is, I mean, you if you follow me, you know that I'm one for chutzpah. I'm one who thinks that the truth needs to be used as a powerful weapon when it comes up against a lie that's powerful. And Trump's big lie has proven powerful. So what I would have done, as soon as I recognized that that the Trump base was rallying around Trump and being bound to him through the big lie, the Republican Party soon was making his big lie about the stolen election into party dogma. Anybody who questioned it was kicked out of the party. So he was weaponizing that lie in a whole variety of ways. And as president, I would say I had two big reasons to go after him on that. One is, it's my job that I just swore an oath to do, to defend the Constitution. And I was questioning the results of a legitimate election, setting aside that I was the winner. I'm also the guy who has to protect the Constitution against that kind of an attack. And now we're in 2024, and we got those tens of millions. And what I feel like he should have been asking, also saying, going after him, because the fact that he didn't fight for the hearts and minds of those conservatives now threatens to allow fascism to win on the next go round. So I think it would have been better if he had said, if he had gone on national TV. Chutzpah is sometimes appropriate. I would have gone on national TV and said, this is not political. I took an oath to defend the Constitution. That's required of everybody who assumes this office. And what Donald Trump is saying, I wouldn't necessarily name him. There are ways of putting all. The idea that I'm here illegitimately is an attack on the Constitution. We have had these 60 court cases. We have had these X number of recounts. It is never the former president's own director of security for the election has said this is the most secure and clean election in American history. His attorney general has said there is no fraud here enough to affect the outcome. I am the legitimate leader. Whether you like it or not, I am the president of the United States, the man that the American people chose through a constitutional process. We as American patriots are required to respect that I have this job and not to believe this the obvious big lie that's been disproven in as many ways as such a lie can be disproven, but to respect the constitutional process. I'm going to, I request that those of you who have believed this thing look into the facts, follow the facts, honor the Constitution, accept the outcome of an election. That is the covenant that we Americans took when we ratified the Constitution. Don't let any would-be dictator subvert American democracy in such a way as to deny the legitimacy of a clean and secure election. Thank you, my fellow Americans. Thanks for listening if you've stayed with me this long.